All right, so buckle up, everyone, because we're diving headfirst into a situation that's about as predictable as well, let's just say it's complicated. We're talking Israel, we're talking Hezbollah, and we're talking about this conflict that seems to be uh, escalating, to put it mildly.
Yeah, escalating might be putting it lightly,
Right.
honestly.
I mean, you've seen the headlines, the news alerts, probably some of the videos coming out of the region. It's intense. And we're not just going to sit here and give you the same old rundown you'd get from, well, anywhere else.
Well,
We're going deep past the headlines, past the talking heads, and right into the heart of why this is happening and, maybe more importantly, how it might play out.
the million-dollar questions for sure.
Exactly. Okay, so for the record, it is September 22nd, 2024. And if this all feels a bit too familiar, you're not wrong. We saw a similar, I don't even know what to call it, a surge.
Flare up.
Flare-up, yeah, and fighting back on October 7th. But before we get into all of that, let's set the stage with what's going on right now. Overnight, Hezbollah launched over 100 projectiles, rockets, mortars, you name it, into Israel.
And not just out into the desert. These were aimed at military positions, infrastructure, even a...
Places with, let's just say, strategic significance.
There you go. That's the phrase.
Right. But, and this is important, this isn't some random act of aggression. Hezbollah has a strategy, a very deliberate strategy, of responding to Israeli actions, and often with these very public displays of force.
It's a dangerous game of chess, really, with each side trying to anticipate the other's next move, knowing that every move has consequences.
And this isn't just some distant conflict playing out on our TV screens. This latest round of fighting has had a very real impact. Schools are closed in northern Israel. People are being told to avoid public gatherings. There's this constant tension, this fear of what comes next, you know?
Absolutely. And the footage coming out of places like Kiryat Bialik, burning cars, buildings reduced to rubble, it's a stark reminder of just how devastating this conflict really is.
And tragically, when you have this much firepower being used in densely populated areas, the risk of civilian casualties is incredibly high. In Lebanon, we're already seeing reports of over 100,000 people displaced from their homes because of the fighting. Their lives turned upside down.
And that's the human cost of this conflict that we often forget about.
Exactly. It's easy to get caught up in the politics and the military strategies. But at the end of the day, these are real people whose lives are being torn apart.
And it's a cycle of violence that's been going on for far too long.
Now, some people might be wondering what sparked this latest escalation. And the truth is, these strikes from Hezbollah are actually in response to Israeli airstrikes on Hezbollah targets in Lebanon.
Preemptive strikes, they call them.
Right, preemptive. And that word is doing a lot of heavy lifting in this situation. And it suggests that Israel felt they had to act first to prevent a larger attack from Hezbollah.
But whether that justification holds water or if this only serves to further escalate an already volatile situation, well, those are questions that, frankly, are going to be debated for years to come.
Absolutely, and we're going to unpack all of that right after this break. It's a bit like trying to put out a fire with more fire, isn't it?
Yeah, not exactly a recipe for peace and tranquility.
Not even close.
Yeah.
But to really wrap our heads around this, we need to zoom out a bit, see the bigger picture, because this isn't just about the past few days or even weeks.
No, this goes back decades. Literally, layers upon layers of conflict, tension. It's messy.
Messy is one word for it. So if we want to make sense of what's happening today, we need to, well, unpack some of that history.
Absolutely, and it's impossible to ignore the elephant or maybe the cedar tree in the room.
Hezbollah.
Hezbollah, we're talking about a group that's been a major force in the region for a long time.
Right, this isn't some, fly-by-night operation.
Not at all. But their history, it's complicated, to say the least.
That's putting it mildly. So for those who might not have every detail memorized, let's do a quick refresh. Who is Hezbollah? What are they all about?
Okay, so Hezbollah, in the simplest terms, is a political and militant group based in Lebanon.
They're Shia Islam, right?
Correct, Shia Islam, and they're backed by Iran, which is a key factor in all of this.
Definitely. And a lot of Western countries, including the U.S., consider them a terrorist organization.
That's right. They're known for having a pretty significant military presence in Lebanon.
And they actually have a lot of influence on Lebanese politics. I mean, this isn't just some fringe group.
Oh, absolutely not. They hold seats in Lebanon's parliament. They have a real say in how the country is run, which, again, makes this whole situation even more complex.
With layers on layers with this one.
It always is in this region, unfortunately. But to really understand what's going on now, we kind of have to rewind the clock a bit, because the history between Israel and Hezbollah, Well, it's not pretty.
Understatement of the year.
Pretty much. We're talking decades of conflict, going all the way back to the 1980s, back to Israel's invasion of Lebanon in 1982.
And that was just the beginning.
Sadly, yes. And one event that really casts a long shadow over everything is the Sabra and Shatila massacre in 1982.
Hundreds of Palestinian civilians slaughtered in refugee camps. Absolutely horrific.
It was. Now, to be clear, Israel wasn't directly responsible for the massacre itself, but it happened during their occupation of Lebanon.
And it really fueled a lot of the anger and resentment that, frankly, helped solidify Hezbollah's image as a resistance movement against Israel.
Exactly. It was a turning point in a lot of ways, a very dark chapter in this conflict story.
Okay, so we've got Hezbollah, we've got decades of conflict, we've got enough bad blood to fill the Dead Sea, but this CNN article you shared, it mentions some other things happening alongside these rocket attacks and airstrikes.
Right. Things that are easy to miss when you're just skimming the headlines, but they're important.
Like this raid on Al Jazeera's office? That's not insignificant.
Not at all. The Israeli military raided Al Jazeera's office in Ramallah, which is in the occupied West Bank.
Shut it down, confiscated equipment, the whole 9 yards.
Ordered it closed for 45 days. Their justification was biased reporting, particularly when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
And this isn't even the first time Al Jazeera has been targeted by Israel, right?
Nope. Back in May, Israel shut down Al Jazeera's Jerusalem office, also for alleged biased coverage.
Which, and maybe it goes without saying, but when you see a government cracking down on media organizations, especially during a time of conflict, it raises some serious red flags.
Absolutely. Freedom of the press is essential, especially in these situations. It makes you question, how much transparency is there really? How much are we not seeing?
Exactly. And then there's the Netanyahu situation. Postponed his trip to the UN General Assembly because of everything that's going on.
Which, you don't reschedule a UN trip unless things are pretty serious.
It's like missing your kids' graduation because your house is on fire.
Exactly. It sends a message.
And that message is,
we're not backing down. This is far from over.
so let's see if I can sum this up. We've got Hezbollah launching rockets, Israel carrying out airstrikes, a history of conflict that goes back generations, concerns about freedom of the press, and world leaders hitting the pause button on their schedules. It feels like we're standing on a powder keg here.
That's one way to put it. The million-dollar question is, can this be contained? Or are we about to see this whole thing spiral out of control?
Because even Jake Sullivan, and he's not one to overreact, he's the U.S. National Security Advisor, he's saying he's worried about this escalating, about it spreading.
Yeah, risk of escalation, that's diplomatic code for things could get really bad really fast.
Right. And it's not just Israel and Hezbollah we have to worry about here, right? Hezbollah, they've got Iran in their corner, and Iran, well, they're not going to just sit this one out.
No. Iran has a vested interest in this. They've been supporting Hezbollah for decades, and they're not afraid to throw their weight around.
And then there's Gaza. I mean, things are already incredibly tense there. It's like adding gasoline to a fire that's already out of control.
Exactly. This isn't happening in a vacuum. The entire region is on edge. One wrong move, one miscalculation, and this could easily spiral into something far bigger and far more dangerous than what we're seeing right now.
So no easy answers, no clear path to peace. Is that what you're saying?
I wish I had better news, but that's the reality of the situation. Too many factors at play, too much history, too much mistrust. It's hard to be optimistic right now.
It's tough.
Yeah.
That's for sure. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, haven't we? We've talked about everything from those rocket attacks that happened just last night to the decades-long conflict that led up to this point. We talked about Hezbollah, about Iran's role in all of this, the concerns about freedom of the press, and the very real possibility that this could spiral into a much larger conflict. But I think the biggest takeaway, the thing that's really sticking with me, is just how quickly things can change in this part of the world.
It's true. It's a reminder that we need to pay attention, we need to stay informed, and we need to understand the complexities of this region if we want to make sense of it all.
And maybe that's a good place to leave it for today. It's a lot to process, and we've thrown a lot of information your way. But hopefully you come away from this with a better understanding of what's at stake, why this conflict matters, and why we should all be paying attention. As always, thanks for taking this deep dive with us. Stay curious, and we'll see you next time.